This is our last session before lunch. We're going to talk a bit about the challenge of engaging academics with science communication. Science communication taken in the widest possible sense, really. Everything they do is science. Science taken in the widest possible sense to include arts, humanities, social sciences and everything else. Everything they do is specialist work for specialist audiences. And science communication is anything that they do which expands beyond that. And we have with us today on stage Michael Head, Dr. Michael Head, who is a clinical researcher, senior research fellow at the University of Southampton, who, as we will hear shortly, over the last year or so, has, with the Director of Comms at Southampton, developed a kind of bridge role where Michael, who is a regular contributor to the conversation, uses that profile and his skills to kind of be an ambassador to encourage other academics to get involved. So we'll hear a bit about that. Andy Tattersall is a former journalist, long time ago, but turned a researcher into information communication, and particularly those in an academic context. So he's also a regular contributor to the conversation, though not for a few years. And we'll hear a lot more about his sort of perspective on helping academics to understand what they can do to share their research and also why they should bother. And finally, Tadhg Caffrey, who is has a new job title as of day before yesterday. So he's a head of research, impact, policy and engagement.
Yes, but that is not definitely set in stone.
Damn it. So Tadhg is a big dog from the Bartlett at UCL and the Bartlett School of Architecture, and is going to sort of speak to the impact side, because impact is a form of science communication as well. And all of these things are things that we need to encourage academics to do more of. So, without further ado, let's move on. I'd like to start then, if I may, coming to you, Michael. So just talk us through, if you would, how this role developed and what it was and sort of what came of it.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. Being an academic, I can't possibly come to a meeting without a presentation deck, so that's what I've got lined up for you here. I would also add the caveat that I did create these slides yesterday evening whilst drinking gin out of a tin and watching the election coverage, so the contents of it will be as much of a surprise to me as it is to you. So Advocacy Manager is the new job title that we have here at the University of Southampton. It's a role we created a little while ago, and it's based in the Communications Directorate, and it's basically a permanent one-day-a-week role. It's for academics who are, in theory, good with their public comms. And it is to work with fellow academics and to tell them how and why to engage with the media and the comms stakeholders. And through that, we have done, for example, lots of training sessions, lots of one-to-ones. We've run a couple of writing retreats. Often universities will run retreat days for writing a grant application or a paper. We've done this for writing conversation articles and blog posts and so on. And why do we do it? I think the short summary is, I don't know if I've got any Southampton comms colleagues here today, actually, but, oh, hello there. Good to see you. So you can correct me if I'm wrong here at all, but there was perceived to be too little engagement from our academics with the kind of the public domain, so including the conversation, including mainstream media and so on. So we set about to try to change that a bit. And the person in post, it was previously me, I helped set it up. We've now got the wonderful Dr. Larissa Yaravoya, who is big in cryptocurrency research. She's in our University of Southampton Business School. This is one of the slides I've presented to our academics when sort of saying, right, why? You're often funded publicly by the taxpayer or charities. And there is public interest in your research, whether you know that or not. But actually, the public do like to hear about new science and things like that. If you're still not convinced, we tell them about the REF. For those who don't know the REF, most of you do by the sounds of it. But it's one of the assessment frameworks that is vitally important to all universities. It dictates how much money we get from the government and things like that. So once you mention the REF to an academic, they kind of nod and go, all right, then I will. And then similarly with university rankings as well. Flawed though they are to a very great extent, universities really care about rankings. And thus, therefore, we staff have to care about them as well. And in terms of how, so I think Southampton's pretty good at the two on the left there, the public engagement and outreach. And we have, as I said, been less good at media engagement. I've done it. I've been on the telly a lot during the pandemic. Infectious diseases is my area. So there is me at various stages of lockdown haircut on different TV channels. And I would say that actually my research is around vaccines, vaccine hesitancy and so on. So for years I have the cranks in my inbox at all times. Anyway, that intensified during the pandemic. So you get accused of genocide and being worse than Hitler and things like that a lot. You get people saying they're very disappointed in you for saying vaccines are great. And then there's this one as well. I won't read it out for obvious reasons, but that is the entirety of the email. There was no "Dear Michael, best wishes," top and tailing it. That was it. And I've got literally hundreds like that in my inbox. Literally hundreds. Fun times. You do get some more fun ones. I apparently am a member of the Illuminati. I no idea who or where this came from, but I'm on there. If you look on the other end, Chris Whitty's on there as well. So me and Chris apparently are on a pedestal together. But you do get things like that. And then you do get genuinely fun ones, which I like having. I wrote an article about vaccines and someone said they were going to report me to Ofcom repeatedly. I had 3 emails from that person. This person said that I read a Sky News article which you criticise Eamon Holmes. And I had, actually. This is true. It's an obvious thing for an infectious disease scientist to criticise the king of daytime telly, isn't it? But he was banging on about 5G might be something to do with coronaviruses. And I and other scientists said, no, it isn't. And I then got a lot of the abuse actually came from me criticising Eamon Holmes, genuinely. Good fun. And then there's this person who, again, repeatedly emailed me because I said something like, jogging outside is fairly safe, it's fine, go and do it. But as you can see from the bottom, his final email suggests, are you a jogger by any chance? Only that could explain it. I enjoy those ones. Less of the abuse, but those ones are quite good fun.
You're in the pocket of big jogging.
I'm in the pocket of big jogging. And you can buy more on my website. That's me feeding the fish in the pond at home. That's on the local news. Also, the South Korean state broadcaster rocked up at my home as well to do the same thing. God knows why, but they did. That's showbiz. And then also I got featured on the Bookcase Credibility Twitter feed, which I loved because it's got 120,000 followers. So they rated my background and my bookcase, which is behind me in that screenshot. So this sort of thing I did really enjoy. It actually broke up my day quite a lot when it came to media engagement. This sort of thing is what we present to our academics. It raises your profile. Academics love having their profile raised. We have a huge ego. If we can massage it even more, so it's the better. Increases the chance of impact. The gentleman here with the job title of impact in it. Maybe, maybe not. But yes, but for now we say yes. Impact is important. Increases your own academic citations as well. If you're in the papers, apparently, your sort of journal paper citations go up too. It's good for self-confidence, and certainly my grandmother would repeatedly ask me to send her any interviews I did on the telly, long beyond the point I'd got bored of them. And the university likes us being in the news. The university has an ego as well, and likes being on the telly and having the words University of Southampton at the on the bottom of the screen. So all of these reasons are kind of things that we talk to our academics about. We were talking just briefly before about bibliometrics and that sort of thing. Altmetrics is a measure of attention. I think it's quite literal as a definition. This is one of my policy brief documents. You can click on that kind of 320 line there where the mouse cursor is, and then it produces various metrics. We wrote a conversation article about it as well, which means it's in the news. And you then get numbers like these that sort of say your output is ranked 1 out of however many from Figshare, or this one here, it's basically in the top 1% of all articles ever on Figshare. To be able to quantify impact outputs is important. Flawed, this is massively flawed, but you can game the system and get some good numbers out of it. So, which impresses funders, impresses universities, and means you've got something to show people. What have you done with the cash you got for research? In terms of outputs from this advocacy manager activity, on the left, that's our conversation outputs from this time frame, and below it is kind of the first year of the advocacy manager role. So we increased our conversation articles and author numbers by about 50% each. And then on the right, you can see the general trend, which is kind of going up over time. And then also the articles published, you can see the sort of the darker red bars are towards the right. So we were increasing our conversation metrics over time, which was a key focus of the university. In terms of dealing with the abuse, I know I have made light of it here, but it was quite intense at times. So I teamed up with Larissa, cryptocurrency, Ashton Kingdon, who deals with terrorism research. You can imagine her inbox. And Millie Downer, who's one of our social media managers. And we wrote this article in Times Higher Education about how to deal with the abuse. And also we did produce new kind of guidance and resources on that's our internal university website. It's probably one of the things I'm most proud of in this role, actually, is producing these sets of guidance and resources. So just to conclude, it's about building bridges between academics and the centre of the university, as we academics call it, which is kind of everyone else. It could be finance, it could be contracts, it could be media and comms people. But we don't always work very well together. So this is an attempt to do that better. I think a formal post with allocated person time is helpful. Volunteers are good, that's really good, but if you can have someone in post, you've kind of got guaranteed time and you can rely on them to do stuff. Even if they're busy, they still have to devote time to this. And we've done a lot of reinforcing to the academic what they get out of it. I think my colleagues will be talking a bit more about that in terms of why academics should do it. But also it's timely, I think, this kind of work, because funders, research funders, are demanding impact, not just writing a shiny paper in the Lancet or Nature. That's not good enough anymore. And then there's the ref and the world rankings. So kind of, dear academics, whether you like it or not, we're going to be on your back to kind of actually do stuff. Public engagements, go into a school or go on the telly and talk about your findings. And yeah, I wrote an article about that in Times Higher Education as well. Can you tell we've got a new subscription to Times? We do. So we've been writing in it. So yeah, you can go and read that article. That's there as well. But I think I will stop there and let my colleagues now contribute. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. So maybe I could just follow up a few questions. So yes, do read those two articles Michael and his colleagues wrote in Times Higher. They're both very good. Maybe I could just pick up on the first of those, which was the piece you wrote about dealing with abuse. It's often a question that gets asked, and you know, here am I at the conversation insisting that academics spend more time putting their head above the parapet in order that they do this kind of public-facing work, and quite reasonably so. People occasionally point out that if one does that, people take pot shots at it. And somewhat unkindly, very often when people say, what should we do about this? My instinctive reaction is grow a thicker skin, which isn't hugely fair, but is actually 50% of the answer. I had a colleague, an old friend of mine who used to work for the Daily Mail, and she would constantly be asked to do strange features that involved her dressing up in stupid ways, doing, you know, synchronized dancing, synchronized swimming in a swimming pool, all this kind of thing. So she'd write these features, and then you have the comments on the Daily Mail website. And she would say to me, "Oh, I never looked down there. You know, what possible good could come from reading the comments on the Daily Mail with pictures of a woman in a bikini?" Absolutely out of the question. And so, to some degree, you know, you do the public outreach. You don't have to necessarily pay attention to what people are throwing back at you, especially when it is clearly baseless, pointless abuse. But that said, I mean, could you just sort of see what your materials said about that in terms of what academics can do to kind of brush that off?
Yeah, so some of the things we did do was kind of reinforce that actually the media isn't as scary as maybe you're thinking. One of my concerns, particularly at the start of the pandemic, was that I might end up the wrong side of a Daily Mail headline or something like that. But actually the press, I think, treated me very well on the whole. There's one or two cranks out there, but on the whole, not. So even I hate the Mail, but I deal with the Mail health journalists because they are pretty good, actually. And they're not the ones writing the screamy headlines at the top. So I think there's sort of reassuring like that abuse is there but rare, and it depends a little bit on your subject area. If you're talking about vaccines or cryptocurrency or even things like dealing with the tobacco lobby or that sort of stuff, you might well get some abuse. So you have to be prepared for it. Part of it is developing a thicker skin. Part of it is knowing when to put the laptop down and walk away for an hour, a day, whatever it is. So Larissa did do this really nice kind of sliding scale of abuse. If you're on Twitter, high abuse, LinkedIn, low abuse, and then kind of the other ones in the middle. So you can then choose your platform. If you really are not keen on abuse at all, but want to do public comms, maybe LinkedIn. If you're not so fussed about it and want to kind of get to the public more, you might look at, maybe not so much nowadays, but Twitter during the pandemic. So there's a lot of where to go internally around if you do get abuse and you're stressed or concerned about it, a lot of kind of signposting to the relevant information, and what to do when you receive it, which can be to ignore, not to go below the line, tend to agree with that. On my conversation articles, I noticed there's comments there, I never read them. I think even they're probably more sensible than most places, but there's still the odd kind of vaccine crank in there and so on. So if you could stop doing that, Michael, it'd be appreciated. But yes, I think reassurance, signposting, know when to step away. Are sort of some of the key messages that we have put into those seminars and training materials and things like that.
I was going to say that, and it's a pleasure to be on stage with someone from the Illuminati, by the way. So I just want to say that right now, just in case.
Signatures in the lobby later.
Yes. So look after me and my family, please. So, but I just want to say, having a thick skin goes so far, and we're three white males on stage, and so there's a lot of academics, and we see it in politics. If you look at things like Diane Abbott, she's a woman and she's black. So she gets a harder time for those two things. So if you're an Asian academic, a Muslim academic, if you're disabled, people will go after those things and be very, very nasty and very gnarly. And that can really, really hurt. And those things kind of last with you. And if you have that bad experience, especially if you're an early career researcher, someone starting out, it's like going to, we heard an analogy today about a restaurant. If you go to a restaurant and have a bad experience, you'll not go back to that restaurant again. So if you go and try and do something, I'm going to go on X and I'm going to try and communicate my research, and you get a load of howling lunatics at you and abuse, and it's very personal, you're going to want to step away from that. And I think we've got to do more to sort of like protect members in our community. A lot of people can stand up for themselves, but we also have to ensure, particularly as communicators, that we do things to help them around reputation, to let them know. And when I do teaching, I teach externally and internally. And when I talk about reputation management, I say it's basically like home insurance. You don't want to ever cash it in. It's boring. It's a waste of money. But as long as you know about it and the pitfalls, it may protect you later on. And hopefully we never need to go and cash in that insurance. So.
Might just reflect on that as well. Completely agree. And I think your reflections, Michael, on how this is a new space for a lot of our academic colleagues is really helpful here, because it costs time and it costs money. And this means that when people are doing something that feels like an extra, even if we feel like it should be integrated into the work, and they're taking the time to do that, and the result of that is abuse, that's a very difficult thing to sell to them. And so I think there's two spaces here that we need to get better at, as you say. One is actually providing some skills and support to people who are in those situations. And two is understanding that academics are really vulnerable in this space, and empathizing with that issue. So I think it's that point on privilege is absolutely really well made. And it's something that we need to be aware of and not be expecting all of our academic colleagues to be perfectly attuned to this type of work. Some people might revel in that debate and that conflict, and some people might find it incredibly difficult. And if we're asking them to do that and we're not providing them thoughtful, reflective support in which to carry that out in a meaningful way, I think we're asking a lot of them, really. So a bit of give and take there, I would suggest.
Thank you. Just to pick up on this part of your role, Michael, is that, or your former role, I should say, is that something I've definitely found from working at the conversation is that, very often it's the case that academics tend to listen to other academics. And they, I can ask an academic to say exactly the same thing that I would say, and their ears prick up when an academic peer says something to them, and their eyes glaze over when I say it to them, or where one of you say it to them, perhaps. So I think it's interesting that this ambassador role is an academic, is one of their peers. It is someone who is doing subject matter expertise, who is doing research, but has found a way to, jump the fence and also find a habit, a set of skills, an interest, a delight even in doing this kind of public media work. And when they have the opportunity to not just have me tell them that they should do that and it would be good for them, but for someone else to say, I did do that and it was good for me, it makes all the difference. And I just wonder whether you could comment on that in terms of whether you found there was, perhaps you don't have a control to compare to, but did you find that you did get a lot of traction because you were one of their own, if you like, talking to them?
Yeah, basically that. That's me as an academic, and now Larissa, who is an academic, are kind of doing that role as that's very deliberate. Because kind of the social media team can kind of bring the ideas to the academics, but it is jumping over the fence between academics and the other bit of the university. So I think that kind of type of engagement, I think it's subjective. We don't have this control group or whatever, but I think it has been successful in terms of me being able to say, been there, done that, got the T-shirt, you can wear the T-shirt too. And actually one other thing we also point out is, for example, the number of reads you get on a conversation article as a kind of another kind of sort of carrot is that we publish journal articles. No one reads journal articles. Even we academics barely read them. We might scan them and cite them because it looks interesting, but no one reads a journal article really. You might have tens or hundreds of thousands of people reading a conversation article. I've got nearly 3 million reads on the conversation, which is the number I quote everywhere. I'm just about to submit a grant. I've got a promotion application going through. That number is all over it, let me tell you that. So I think be able to sell those stats, again, sounds better coming from me than even probably the best social media manager. They are coming with that message, and if I can back it up and say, yep, I agree with them, that just helps to translate the message.
And I suppose for those of you that are in the session here earlier, talking about Gen Z, I'm sure it will have come up, the idea of using student ambassadors. If you want to reach students or would-be students, get your current students to talk to them. Yeah, peer communication. They're going to listen to them, and they know which questions to ask. They know which answers to give. They know what their peers are interested in. Andy, do you want to comment on that as well? In terms of because you're a researcher yourself, and you've also sort of worked with.
I don't know what I am actually. I've got a lot of autonomy with what I do. I would have been academic related, but academia increasingly seems to push people to being professional or academic, which I think is a problem. There's no middle ground about that. But having people like Michael are worth the weight in gold because they're advocates, they're keen, they're at the forefront. And like you say, people don't listen sometimes to people who are doing professional law. So you make friends with those people. You go for coffees with them. You actually embed yourselves with them. I used to have a lovely office, and I took myself out of it and sat in an open plan with a load of people who do research on alcohol policy and public health. And I can chat to them. I can give them ideas, and they can say, that's rubbish, it won't work because of this. And they can ask me things, and we can have an actual conversation. We're having water cooler moments all the time. And that's a problem sometimes when you are away from the academics. So when you do get people like Michael, you're very busy people, but you try and just use them as best you can because other academics will listen. He's got the metrics to back it up. He's got the evidence. And when you start hearing about this has gone on my promotion case, this is, often people say, can you tell me my H index for this? How many citations I've had? We all know there's cognitive dissonance going on here a little bit with this. But when we talk about things that are genuinely impactful in society and that you're actually getting cited in policy, and that's one of the things that altmetrics is particularly good at because most academics don't realise they're being cited in policy. They might perceive they are, a lot say they haven't, and when you actually check the numbers, say, well, you've been cited in 12 international policy papers, they get very, very giddy about that because it is really useful, it's tangible.
Tadhg.
Yeah, sorry, just really briefly to add, really agree on that. And I think we're all conscious of very limited resources that we have within higher education and within our professional services spaces. So we have to make those decisions about, do we need everyone in the institution to be part of a communications plan or be in the media, or do we try to do a bit of capacity building by focusing in on some of these key colleagues who are attuned to this work and can therefore be fantastic examples like Michael. So it's worth being very self-conscious within your own planning about how you balance that need to spread things out, but focus in on some champions.
Thank you. I just want to return to something which is, as I'm sure you'll all agree, a right old chestnut. And that is the question of, which is related to what we're talking about, it's the question of putting public communication work, this aspect of what we expect of academics, on a more institutional, fundamental footing. In other words, money, right? Paying for it. If you're going to ask an academic to split up their time between teaching, research and admin, but expect them to do something that isn't teaching, research or admin, where's that time going to come from? So I think that no one wants to talk about money, but maybe there is a place where, with the increased importance of REF and the growing kind of institutional awareness of REF, the growing importance of research culture, maybe that moment, that tipping point where institutions begin to think maybe this is something we should start funding. Maybe that point is coming. Andy, you were quite interested in that sense of how and why things should be funded. And indeed, your role is kind of that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, traditionally I've been centrally funded by the university, even though I work in an academic department. And I've long argued that we have people, and a lot of people here will be working in isolation often. They're sort of like juggling a lot of people. They're trying to support a lot of people. They often feel like they're just spinning too many plates. And universities are increasingly struggling for money. It's getting tighter, purses are getting tighter. And academics are being asked to do things like information governance more, research ethics, the REF, CAF, all these things. They're things that they've got to do. Communications often feel like a bolt-on, but they know they should be doing it. Some of them want to do it. They just don't know how to do it, and they need support. And so I've long argued that communications should be part of the funding process. And when people put in bids, quite often they'll put in a bid, they do the research, and then a week later, sort of like after they've done the research, say, we need to do some communications, we don't know what to do, the research's been done, and it's all after the horse has bolted. So what we need to do is actually factor in communications as part of that and do it internally, because it's often cheaper and it's people who are actually working in the institution who have a better understanding. Now, external consultants are great, they'll do some really good videos and do some social media for you, but actually funding it and including it, and if someone puts in a £1 million bid and you get on there for 5%, that's 50 grand to help with communications. And funders do want to do that. You've got NIHR, Wellcome, they're quite progressive. They do want to do this, and I'm actually part fund a day a week as a director of scientific communication for an NIHR project called Knowledge Public Health, which is about getting NIHR research into local government and making an actual difference, because an awful lot of research takes a long time to get into actual practice, and we're publishing more research, so it's just going to get harder. And when we talk about public health research, this is incredibly important to us. So actually getting onto research bids, being the expert, even if you're just 5% of that bid, that's some money, and that money starts to add up, and then you can start to argue, right, we can now fund another communications role, someone who can perhaps work under that person and start to learn all those skills. And you start to do this because the university invariably favours marketing, getting students in. Communications gets a sort of a second tier. So if you can start to get it through funders and do it that way, you've got a better chance of actually supporting this.
Get someone else to pay for it.
Basically, yes. Yes.
Might just really briefly reflect on that, because I think it's an interesting point around the tipping point, Michael, as you say, and that there's a lot of different agendas and trends that mean there's more attention here, more capacity, more, a change there really. But the thing that I'm missing is where the give is, so what we stop doing, because there is a limit to workload and capacity here, and the more expectation we have on people, the more that becomes constrained. And I think the angle that we try to take at University College London and within the Bartlett faculty where I'm based is to build the argument that this type of work improves your teaching, improves your research, and improves your partnerships. So trying to properly embed that with their pre-existing agendas and the things that they care about, rather than trying to convince them that this apparently new agenda is something that they need to make time for. And if we can properly and thoughtfully map out and really get into the specifics about how being engaged with people actually improves your work, I think that's where we get some value. And there's a big thing here around how communications and impact is linked to diversity. So diversity of ideas and people, methods and opportunities. And that diversity coming together makes research and teaching better. And I think that's the angle we try to build from.
Just as you mentioned, that sense of how academics might feel that their work is one thing and all of this is something else entirely. But of course, what media work can do is bring visibility, is bring suddenly you're not just a random expert doing a thing in a silo. You are that expert doing a thing in public. You're an expert in public, and people looking for those experts, that expertise will find you because suddenly you're Googleable. And that brings opportunities. It brings opportunities. It's an opportunity to expand your network. It's an opportunity to bring people into your research group. It's an opportunity to find research users, which could go on to generate impact. Very early days in the conversation, we had someone from Leeds who wrote about smart cities of the future. What do we want from our smart cities of the future? Kind of a rhetorical question. But blow me, it got republished in The Guardian very prominently on the front page. And hundreds and hundreds of people chipped in about what they wanted from their smart cities of the future. So he got his postdoc to copy all those off and reinsert them into his research. We asked hundreds of people what they wanted from their smart cities of the future, and they said. Right? It's an opportunity to use what the media can bring, which is reach, visibility, to acquire things or reach people that would otherwise be difficult or expensive or time-consuming. And if you explain it to them like that, it's like you're not asking them to do something which is nothing to do with their work, that they couldn't possibly conceive of having any relevance. It's just an add-on. It is part of their work. It can enhance their work. And when you sell it like that, suddenly it becomes less of an add-on and more of a, module. I don't know. Questions?
This is for Michael, really. So I had a situation earlier this year where we had a story. It was the biggest mention of University of Leicester that we've ever seen for the year on our media monitoring software. But it was nothing to do with our academics' research. What it was that they had found a creature that had never been seen before in the UK, and it was the first time that had happened. And that's very interesting. And raised a lot of questions, and such as, there's a lot more of these creatures apparently than we thought, because people have been seeing them for years and years and years. They just haven't been talking about it. And then also about climate change, things like that. But everything was great, and this academic was very, very receptive until it got picked up by the tabloid press, and then they suddenly got very uppity about it, that they weren't being taken seriously, that it wasn't being taken seriously. But from my point of view, it had a really big impact. But from that point onwards, it didn't really move. You said that you work with the Daily Mail despite not really agreeing with them. How have you kind of got over that barrier? What's your advice to other academics in that kind of situation?
Yeah, and I do get their point, and I kind of have thought a lot about where's my cut-off point. So I will speak to the Daily Mail or the Express, neither of which I like. I won't speak to GB News because they are just too conspiracy theory driven and just completely awful, in my opinion. But so I think, if the Daily Mail is going to write an article about vaccines, I think there's a danger they may do it wrong and ruin public confidence in vaccines. If I can make a possibly crap article less crap, maybe I'll do it. That's so if I can prove the quality of what I might perceive to be a low quality piece of journalism, to kind of put a bit of fact into it, then that I think is probably worth doing. And everyone will have their kind of cut-off threshold, but that's why I will speak to kind of Mail journalists and Sun journalists and so on. And when I have spoken to particularly the specialist ones, the health and science editors, so actually I did a few times turn down, I can't remember the name of the political editor at the Sun, I can't remember his name, but he did email me a few times to ask for quotes, and I wasn't convinced that they would use them well. So I didn't give them any quotes, whereas the health editor at the Sun I have, because they are specialists in that area. And it's in their interest to do a good job, actually. So I think I would say that who's asking for the interview or the quotes? Is it kind of the front page headline writers, or is it the the specialist kind of veterinary editor or whatever they might be called at the newspaper. If it's the sort of specialist person, they're probably going to treat you well. And if you think they might do a bad article, if you contribute to it, it might be a better article. So that's also a possible carrot in that area, I would say.
I would also add that it's important to encourage them to not end up speaking to their bubble. People might say, "Oh, I'm delighted to be interviewed by the Guardian," or "I'm horrified to be interviewed by the Mail." It's like, why not? Millions of people read the Mail, and they need to learn from your expertise as well. And particularly if it's that kind of an article, they need to have their perceptions challenged by whatever you might bring to that article. It's an opportunity that they shouldn't miss. Thank you. Questions?
Hello. So I work at Royal Holloway, and we try to make ourselves very visible, obviously, with our academics to make them aware of the support that we offer. The one thing there's obviously a big difference between visibility and trust. And over the years, we've tried different things, from talking about some things you mentioned, Michael, in terms of talking about their own profile and how it can benefit them with media engagement, or looking at a ref. And we tend to find the influx of academics trying to work with us doesn't really change. So I suppose, to the panel, what helps you trust your comms teams?
I would just maybe quickly say, if it's an academic passing on that message, that might help, as opposed to the comms team going across. That could be one angle, as we've done a bit at Southampton. I think we've done it quite well on the whole by taking that route.
Yeah, thank you. So from, I guess, a slightly different perspective within the impact space, just indicating what I use, which may resonate from that communications perspective, probably two main things. So a lot of sympathy. Part of the reason that my job title is uncertain is because everyone just calls me the faculty therapist. So there is a lot of listening to concerns of those colleagues. And then secondly, I'm very critical of the impact space, of communications, of public engagement, of all of these pathways to impact that I work in. And I think if I have any credibility at all with my academic colleagues, it's because they know that I am very reflective on what we're doing. And I'm not just saying, this is great, this will be fantastic, there's no problems here. It's an uncomplicated agenda. I think it's a compromised agenda, and I think it's worth it. But I'm always very keen to make sure that my colleagues understand that I understand that's not simple and that there are risks there. So I'd really encourage you to be able to find your own critical reflection on your space and find ways to share that with those colleagues. And I think that builds credibility.
I think realising that most academics, or certainly a lot, suffer from imposter syndrome. So they're constantly feeling they're not good enough because they're told they're not good enough. You go for peer review, it comes back, you're not good enough. You go for a funding bid, you don't get it, you're not good enough. Even though they are. They're great people, they believe in what they're doing. And it's that reassurance as well, telling them that. And I never force anyone to do anything. There's this kind of, you get some very hardline people that say every academic should be on Twitter or X. But not necessarily so. It's not going to work for everybody. There's horses for courses. So what you do is you try and encourage them and remind them how good they are and what they can do. And one of the things that I've done, which I think has been a good success, is when lockdown came, I thought, well, a lot of my colleagues are not going to be able to go to conferences, disseminate. I started a webinar series, which I ran 35 webinars. I ran it all myself, promoted it, got all the speakers. It helps I've been in my department for 23 years, so I know everybody and I've got influence. I don't have power, but I've got influence. And the webinar series averaged around 75 people attending, which was brilliant from around the world. And I started a podcast series because I've been doing radio podcasts for many years, and I thought I'll bring it in. And the great thing about the podcast is it's a very safe space because you record them in a nice space. You can edit it afterwards. They feel a lot more confident. And what goes out is something, it's not sound bites. It's not a journalist ringing them at 8 o'clock in the morning, but it's an experience that gets them towards that when those situations happen. So you become an ally and a friend. A lot of you will be doing media training and helping academics. And that is really, really important. But doing things like podcasts as well gives something tangible that they can then use to disseminate their work. And loads of them they're naturals. They come along, they sound really well. As long as you get good audio and you've got something that you can then utilise, and it's transferable. You can put it into teaching, knowledge exchange. You get a product that is quite usable. So,
One more point I've thought of is kind of sustained engagement and repeated follow-up. So I think our university, like many, will have like training sessions from the conversation. And I think everyone leaves those training sessions with enthusiasm and ideas, and they're definitely going to write some articles, and then they don't. But I think what we have done quite well at Southampton is we've had those training sessions, and then me and others have gone and sort of personally followed people up. I have literally been emailing people saying, you written anything yet? And we have those writing retreat days. So we have kind of this plan of action of repeated follow-ups in different ways. Sometimes a writing retreat, sometimes a one-on-one, that then sustains the engagement. So the people who leave the conversation training session thinking, I'm definitely going to write something tomorrow never comes. But if you can repeatedly go back to them, then that tomorrow might actually arrive, perhaps a bit more likely. And then you might get some new people popping up because they are repeatedly reminded of it. And that could be helpful too.
Thank you both. I have time for one more question, and because I feel like I'm parting you from your lunch. I am parting you from your lunch.
I was just going to add on to Andy's comment, actually, that if you have got academics who are perhaps nervous at engaging with the media, I'd advise making the most of your in-house platforms as well. So if they're worried that they are going to be misquoted or this idea of sound bites being used, make sure that you've got something prepared on your own news site or blog or podcast so that they've got something to share to back up. So if they do say, oh, hang on a second, they only used this one sentence and they missed the rest out and that wasn't my point, they've got the support there available to go on their own social media platforms or whatever it is to say, here's the full story, actually. Here's me not being misrepresented. And I think I found working with our academics that having that safety net there can actually help them engage with the media a bit more.
Thank you. And indeed, that's something we've done at the conversation as well. An academic has been interviewed by a journalist. They've got the story wrong or misconstrued it. They've come to us and said, I want to put the record straight. And so they've written a version that they control themselves. They don't have to fit into someone else's perspective of what their story is. They have the power to write their own 800 words and make sure it's the approved version. So that's, yeah, and there's no reason why that could not be on the University of X's website as much as it could be on ours. So I think that's very true. Allow them to control the narrative to whatever extent that they can. We're going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much for your questions.